Yeah, so welcome everyone to our 8th meeting of the lecture series Young Prototypes. Today we have our guests that you can see in the screen, Schneider Luescher joining from LA, and Talleresque joining from Ciudad de Mexico, Mexico City. So welcome and thanks so much to our guests for joining. Thank you also to our students, to MSU, Montana State University, and to the larger community that are joining from Bozeman, Montana, or elsewhere, and that have been joining us throughout all of these lectures so far. That have been a lot of fun. So please, again, turn on your videos. And just a reminder before we start that we will be recording this session, so please write to us in the chat, if you have a problem with this or any concerns or comments. And before we jump into the introduction, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome to Young Prototypes, which is a series of talks hosted by Montana State University School of Architecture and curated by BARKOW, Laura Salazar, and myself, which addresses the reciprocity between thinking and building, or building and thinking, through the voice of emerging practitioners. We are interrogating the role of design, research, and criticality in contemporary practice, which is invested particularly in building. And more generally, we're curious about how our peers approach the possibilities of architecture today. In today's session, we will have another back-to-back lecture, like the one we had last week, with Schneider Luescher and Talleresque. So I will introduce our guests. Anton Schneider and Andriy Luescher are the co-directors of Schneider Luescher, who have one of the coolest practice descriptions yet to be seen. They are a monodisciplinary practice operating in the intersection of Jesse and Clarence, 2 streets, we assume. They met while working with Johnston Mark Lee in LA, where they both were project leaders on residential, commercial, and cultural projects for many years. And together they found their practice in 2018 and have both been concurrently teaching at Cal Poly Pomona. I believe some of their students are joining us today, which is also super exciting. So like I said, they're joining us from their office in LA. And Talleresque is a practice led by Mariana Veladrano and Juan de la Rosa, based in Mexico City. The definition of their practice is up for discussion. We're already talking about this a little bit, and means something that resembles something, but not fully. So that's the Talleresque. They started their practice in 2017, and they describe their work as being in constant exploration between perception and imagination of our surroundings. The creative process combines various disciplines, creating a productive ground for Yo-Yo's exploration using simple materials and processes, seeking to rediscover the interrelation of architecture and art. They seek to propose new ways of inhabiting space, which has a starting point in the contemplation of our milieu. Both practices have a really strong approach to representation, and we are confessed fans of their use of models as one of the main process and communication tool. We also admire their passion for what they do and have enjoyed conversations about design and architecture with them. Maybe we can talk a little bit about this later, but without further ado, I'm going to let Schneider Luescher start with her presentation.
Can you guys see the full screen or no?
Yes.
Give it a second.
Oh, we can see your not full screen yet.
Okay, sorry. We got the rainbow thing turning. That's never a good sign.
Yeah. The clock. Sorry.
Okay, there we go.
No problem.
Yeah, I think it's gonna work. I don't know why my screen's doing this.
Sorry, technical difficulties.
Yeah, super weird.
No problem.
Might wanna get it running.
Well, I can get started because I can talk without pictures for a little bit, but thank
Okay.
you so much for having
Now
me.
it's working. Now
Okay.
it's working.
So yeah, we're super happy to join this talk. We have seen a few of the ones that were before, and it was really inspiring seeing all these firms talking about their work. You know, maybe just briefly a little bit more about us and our office. In a way, you know, maybe we are a little bit, we're talking about new prototypes, but maybe we have some old methodologies sometimes in this in our firm. We both worked for Johnson Marquis for quite a while, so we had kind of a path maybe that's a little bit, in a way, almost kind of traditional. You know, we came out of school and then we worked for 10 years or Anton even longer for one firm. Did a lot of projects there, and we're very involved in one place. And I think it, you know, it influenced a lot, but it also kind of gave us a broad kind of experience to then go out and do our own thing that we did about 4 years ago. And we do really enjoy the teaching part as well, but it's also, the teaching is also a way of kind of becoming independent, because when you start a firm, as maybe a lot of you know, you need some, you know, you need to supplement your kind of ways of living with the teaching as well. You know, I think we're very involved in the practice of architecture in a kind of a physical sense. We really enjoy making models and building things. As you can see, this is just a photo of our office, kind of showing models. We do lots of sketches. That's how we work. We do hand drawings. And often not because this is somehow we're like into some traditional form of doing architecture, but because we think it's a good way to do architecture for ourselves, and also to show the client what we want to do, and kind of make them understand our ideas about it. And as you know, in our description, we kind of joke we're a monodisciplinary firm, because we're not interested in other things. We're really interested in art and music and things like that. As you can see from our office, it's littered in art and books about stuff.
We're still on the first slide. I don't know if maybe.
Oh,
Sorry.
Yeah,
good to let us know.
So I think the monodisciplinary part for us kind of is more out of necessity. We feel architecture is so complicated already that we really need to kind of focus ourselves on what we do very often, especially in the kind of environment where we build in Los Angeles. It's regulatory, very demanding. And so we try to be as good at doing architecture as we possibly can. That's why we kind of joke. We're very focused on architecture. That's what we enjoy, and that's what we do, but not meaning that we don't like other things as well.
Can you guys see the slides now or no? Yes, all right. Cool. Yeah, so you could see the mess of models.
Yeah, so this is where we make models. This is like behind us. We can close it off, so it looks different, but you know.
I do have to say that even though we do use old methodologies of construction or a way to make architecture, like the people in our office are really the basis of everything, right? From Noah, that's literally sitting across from us, to previous employees we had from Vince Corona, Ryan Nguyen, Ryan Jose, Angie, and Jung, and obviously Emily and Marvin that you see here in the picture. It really takes a team to create any of these projects. It's not just a two-person job. Like, we can't emphasize that enough. Like, we wouldn't be able to do half of these things without the team. So having said that, we kind of started to think of a little bit about this lecture, and like how to bring in this idea of the prototype. So doing a little bit of reading, we kind of stumbled upon this kind of ideology that was pretty much the predominant way of how people used to think how things came about. So Aristotle really started this idea of the idea that if you breed a camel and a leopard, that's how you get a giraffe. And that was the primary way of how people used to think about how genealogy used to happen, which in a way is very erroneous, right? But there is some truth to it. Essentially, the utilization of hybrid bigger or hetero architecture or heterocies it comes to mind with the idea that if you have two parents, you can breed them to make a stronger offspring. And this actually that's used in genetics, right, in science. Not to be confused with eugenics, but really to try to understand, like, how do you start mixing things to create a third, right? 1 + 1 = 3, as opposed to 1 + 1 = 2. So with the idea of this kind of heterotic architecture, the idea of hybrid architecture kind of came from that. But I think the primary way that hybrid buildings used to be was very much like Ponte Vecchio, was a functional hybrid building, right? Where you're taking multiple functions and applying them to a building, and in a way that would generate the form, right? So in this case, it's housing on a bridge. So we kind of started to get into this idea of what does this hybrid building what does it mean in today's ideas, right? We could look at the custom house in Boston from the 1847 when they did the renovation in 1915. They literally added a tower on top of a dome. So in a way, this to me starts getting a little bit more into the formal idea as opposed to the function, or the function, the hybrid formality versus a hybrid function, right? So then we started looking at Vernon Hilda's Becher's collages, or not even collages, the photographic journalism of these kind of silo warehouses, right? To us, this is more like an aggregated formalism, right? Where you're essentially, if you require an additional unit, you just add one, right? So you could almost see this becomes very much aggregated formalism. So we kind of took a couple of our projects, said like, well, which ones should we talk about to kind of really kind of hone down on this idea? And well, there's a lot of them. And obviously there's like, these is like architecture of additions. We really kind of wanted to focus on the idea of bigger kind of themes about adjacency, embedment, and perching. And with that, I think that's kind of how we would like to start introduce the conversation of these three projects.
So I'll kind of talk briefly about this first one called the Tower House. And I mean, I think also we're interested in this because a lot of projects that we do are additions and renovations to existing houses. But they often are on hillsides and is very restricted what you can do. So you have to come up with a solution how you actually add on to this house. So this was kind of a 1920s craftsman house in Los Angeles that's very common, ubiquitous. They're built in the hills and in flat areas, but you know, it's this was the original house that was there, and the client wanted to add basically like another bedroom, kind of a master suite. And it's almost impossible to build on top of these buildings because you don't really have a functioning foundation. So in order not to destroy the house that's underneath, you have to kind of build behind it or next to it. And so the idea was, well, like we could create a tower and then a building behind it, and the tower would connect the two buildings with each other. And if we look at, these are like some early studies. So it was kind of I guess the crux of the project was like, how do you connect the old with the new? And so we came up with this idea of a stair or a tower. And how do you touch the least amount of site in this hillside? So the new building in the back actually kind of floats across almost like a canyon between the old and the existing. And so these are kind of early model shots of like thinking, you know, the tower kind of grows out of the old building and then connects to a new building. And the client was also like, there was a question about like, how much does the building look like a new building and how much does it look like the existing building? So we had to kind of find a language that somehow navigates between this craftsman style of house. And we were very interested in some of the structural qualities that craftsman houses have with these beams that come out and support these big roofs. So this was our kind of idea to like, well, what if we have big beams that kind of frame the house on the top in order to hold up the roof. So this is during construction. And you can see that basically there's one layer of beams going one direction and then the second layer of beams sitting on top. So kind of very stacked on top. And maybe that's not even so much craftsman because it's actually doing much more structural work than often craftsmen have to do. This was a way to make this work. And then the interesting thing that we kind of wanted to explore was how this stacking of the structure then manifests itself at the opening. So because we had these kind of stacked beams, then the windows in the corners would be different in size because the beam would kind of crop with one window over the other. And you can see this in the way it is under construction, right? And then you can see when the building is finished. This is another model shot we had to show the client what it looks like. We're always interested in skylights to bring in light into the darkest area as well. So this, we explored this in the model, and this is when the building is finished more recently. Here's another picture under construction. So it's much more solid versus, you know, just the framing. Everything gets clad in plywood. And then we did a lot of studies of color, especially the client. The client was really got into like what the color would be of the building. So we had lots and lots of samples on site to decide the exact color of the building. And eventually, this is what the building was painted as. So kind of the color actually then is the kind of element that connects the existing with the old building. And we wanted to show a few pictures of the kind of construction because we think it's kind of interesting how the construction itself is very hybrid. This building has steel in it. This building has a lot of wood. So given that we are in a very active seismic zone, wood construction often has to be reinforced with metal. And it's kind of a very messy way of building. It's not necessarily like a highly precise crafted way, but it works for what we need to do. And then, you know, we have, we kind of joke sometimes that the craftsman comes in when they put up the drywall, because then it looks like this, right? So we rely heavily on the people who put up the drywall and who paint it. This is a stair. So this is the kind of tower, and we did a spiral staircase that connects this. And when it was finished, it looked like this. And when you're looking up on the tower, when you come up, it eventually looked like this. And that's it.
Yeah, so I mean, continuing with this idea of like hybrid buildings in a way, I think this is more of the idea of when the addition goes inside the house. So it's an embedded addition. For this project, essentially, it's an existing house. The client had this kind of configuration to their house. It was a 2-bedroom house. They wanted to add a 3rd bedroom and really kind of expand the house. They wanted to add square footage to both the front of the house and the back of the house. The entrance to the actual house was off to the north side of the property, which when we started looking at it in plan, I mean, contractually, we were kind of signed up to add to the house. But once we really started studying it, we realized that the problem was not adding square footage to the house. The problem was its configuration. So we actually ended up reconfiguring the entire interior of the house to allow the center of the circulation, to allow the circulation to come in from the center as opposed to the edge, mainly because the edges of this property have pretty amazing views all over Silver Lake. So the views were very important. So by pushing the program to the periphery, it was almost like obvious that the circulation should go through the center, also minimizing its runs. So in a way, this is a new configuration. Even though we did add a little bit of space, it still kind of worked out a little bit better. Here you can kind of see the model to, again, show the clients, here's where we study how the light comes in, and then how the materials finish. Now, in this entry, we were really interested in the attic space, right? You could imagine the house would have had a flat ceiling. But because we had all this extra space, over 6 feet or, you know, like 1.5 meters of space in the attic, we actually wanted to lift up that ceiling and really kind of commemorate the entrance of the house with this massive skylight. Now, the skylight itself is fairly small, but the scoop that it creates is much larger to really try to bounce the light off of this entry. And then again, as Andre mentioned, we always kind of like to show this like before we clad it, right? Like it's such a mess. It's like, this is kind of the reason why we can do perhaps the architecture that maybe Talleresque is more famous for, where they're really exposing details. Like in LA, like unless you're actually detailing everything and it's an actual, that's what it's supposed to look like, it's really hard to do, right? So a lot of times you end up actually just cleaning it up by the nature of the drywall. If anything, we have excellent drywallers here in LA. So you could kind of see the idea that that you're now coming off from the center of the house, and that leads you to the other spaces. The idea of hybrid buildings for these kind of additions, you could always imagine it's a hot mess, right? Because you're dealing with an existing house, and then how do you interface the new with the existing? It's always a challenge. Every time you open up a wall, you'll find out that there's secrets to the house that perhaps they could be good secrets or terrible secrets, right? It's like we got to spend more money to try to fix. So this kind of gets you an idea of like how to bring in a project or how to reconfigure a project more from the interior as opposed to just all exterior expression.
So the last project we'll show you is it's called the Trust House, but it really has to do with kind of an addition on top. And one of the first things that the client came to us with was that they bought this mid-century modern home that was not in very good condition, but it was very low. So the ceilings were barely 8 feet, and the client wanted to have a tall house. So we basically, we had to take the roof off and build a new roof on top. So you can see this is the existing house. It's this flat, mid-century modern house with a lot of glass. So it had a lot of interesting features, but it didn't have this tall roof. And we were very worried about the budget and kind of like how much this is going to cost. So we showed lots of other options, and we're like, well, you can just do some skylights, then you also have some taller areas. But in the end, the client was very adamant that this is like an important thing for him to have. So in order to kind of support this new roof, we introduced a steel truss in the back of the house, or the facade with the view, so we can have as much view as possible and support this roof. So we created a Virendell truss or a moment truss, right, that sits in front of the facade, and then the new roof is carried by this truss. Again, we did these models of the floor plans, we rearranged the floor plans, and this is just kind of showing Lou different studies of, what should the shape of this roof be, right? Like, how do we actually make a roof taller, and how do we support this roof? Now, in the end, the final roof shape that we came up with was this. And there's a long story behind this shape, because often like you draw something up and this is what you want to do, but there's so many factors that decide like what a building looks like. So in this regards, we had to deal with the city agency that decided how tall we can build. And we also had a neighborhood council that we had to show the building to, and they had to decide also if our building is too tall or not too tall. So there were like these lots of influence that kind of massaged this building into the final shape. Obviously, we had a say in what it looks like, but in the end, this is basically what we came up with. So it's kind of one tall roof that spans over the entire upper floor and creates then this open kind of living area with a kitchen, dining room, and living room. And then anything that kind of defines the spaces within is mostly furniture. So all these kind of silver elements that you see inside the space, like the fireplace in the front and in the back, the kitchen, these are basically all built-in cabinets that then create the kind of different zones of use within. And then here you can see the truss. And so the other thing we did is this truss kind of extends to one side out, and we added a new exterior deck because there was the best view in that area. And so the material, it's very basic. It's basically a steel truss, and then behind it stucco plaster, which is a very common material here. But we're interested in kind of experimenting with something more textural than what you usually see in stucco. So we looked up different finishing techniques, and one actually kind of established technique is what's called like a raked finish, where they use kind of something like a big rake to make these patterns. But generally it's not very specific, like what that pattern, like what the size of the pattern is. So this is something we did in our office. We came up with a few different patterns to see like, what is the right size to make this pattern on the building. And you see us making this pattern. And in the end, this is kind of, we did 3, I guess these are prototypes of a facade pattern that we tried out.
The other thing that we find interesting is this really comes about the methodology of a three-part stucco system, which the way you build up stucco is we build it up in 3 layers. But the very first layer is called the scratch coat, and that one typically is raked. Like that's actually the way it looks. So it's almost at this moment of transition where sometimes buildings stand where they're getting their stucco placed. They tend to look really beautiful because they're able to kind of capture the light because of this raking. So in a way, we're like, can we use that coat? Usually that coat then gets buried by the other coats, right? As you kind of finish the troweling. But we actually were interested, like, can the coat that's kind of in between the stucco, in the middle of all these layouts, can that be the final coat? So that's really kind of what we're trying to explore in these samples. So yes.
Yeah, that's just basically the building looks very different from one side to the other, right? Very close towards the street, and it's very open towards the view. But the finish of the stucco will be the same.
And I think in general, I think we like to look at these additions. Like, it is really a question. Like, we never were interested in making additions that you can really see like where our addition is and the existing was. But the idea that they can create a third, right? So going back to the misconception of how a giraffe gets made, maybe instead of making giraffes, we're making this CAMEL pardalis, right? Which was the name they used before they coined the name giraffe. But I think I like this image because it's almost like an error in genetics, right? But maybe that's what we're doing in architecture. It's like an error in architecture, and it'll create a third. That's what we got.
Thank you. Thanks so much. I think now that was great. We can let Talleresque jump in, and then we'll have a discussion after that all together.
Yeah.
So this is, do you have a full screen there?
No.
Are we sharing or not?
Yes, you're sharing, but we don't see the full screen.
Okay. Get the full screen. So we were saying at the beginning, no, when we were meeting, all about this message that we're trying to like give ourselves and give out to everybody that sees our architecture and has the opportunity to live through it and buy it. And it's like Talleresque is a made-up word that is a play on words with not only Spanish but Mexican Spanish in particular, that it's taller es que, but it also globally has like another meaning that is like the esque factor of being something that assimilates to something else, no? Like pintoresque, or what other word do you?
I don't know. But it's something that have the traces of something else. So when you are saying that something is esque,
It's like
it reminds you something. It has the details of something else.
So yeah, we thrive upon this because we don't it is important to know that we want to be free and we don't want to be stuck in one aesthetic, one particular aesthetic. And we feel that on contrary to Luescher and Schneider, we do want to I feel that we have very similar ways of thinking in many things, but there is an important thing that we do want to enrich our practice with as much art as we can, as much music, as much cinema, as much party, as much everything. We just want to fill it up with all of that aesthetic and books, drawings, art from friends, close friends. We like to be very like have a close community, and all of us work together and portray our needs and our inquietudes, or the things that we want to question, our dreams, etc. Interests, yes. I'm sorry, English is not my first language, but we will try. So the first slide is the way Talleresque was born. Talleresque was born in a necessity to express one's feelings. We needed to say something. We didn't have an office. We were just two people that had the opportunity, had this landscape that we can see right here. This beautiful, that's actually in Mexico City, in a creek, in a very suburban place to the west side of the city. So we will have these amazing sunsets through the trees that would inspire this kind of behavior, that would inspire all these visions of I don't know, but I look at this and sometimes I like to figure that our architecture and what we propose is something of a dreamy vibe that you have seen it, but you don't know where, and kind of like, so we got ourselves and we just did this project for ourselves. That was my home for 5 years. We started construction in 2015, because I forget, too many years. 2015, and it took a year to do this, and it was all paid by us. It was all constructed by us. Very do-it-yourself. It's very, at least I like to see it very punk, very punk, but with the School of Architecture, the education of our schools. And it is like a furniture, like this house is like a piece of furniture. It's like you could easily just dismount it and take it somewhere else. So we started with this, and people started to come and like this this idea of making a house in your backyard. There's in Mexico, it's a big city, and obviously in the center, there's not as much territory as there is in the outskirts. To be able to experiment and to be able to carry on crazy ideas, because we've never gotten a permit for anything to do anything. We just do it, and that's all kind of like our vibe and what we want to transmit. And then after this house, which is the floating house, we got these from people that would come to our place to party and to have like a nice bonfire at night, or just come and have a morning coffee with us and chat, whatever. These people would say, "Oh, what a great idea. I like this. I see great potential. I have a garden. Why don't you come here and draw us a little, some sketches in a napkin, and we can talk about making a project." So these two projects, this is actually the neighbor that was like, "Oh, very nice house."
The one in the left.
The one in the left, yeah, the one with the tin. It's just sheets of industrial steel, like rolled up, but those we had to get made, because those are actually for like industrial big spaces. So we kind of cheated on that, but our client had no more money. We had to do a wall and a roof. So we said we need a wall that makes a roof in just one piece, and that we don't have to put any impermeabilizante. We don't have to put any water proof. We just have to do that. And so our aesthetic kind of comes out with like the necessities that come with all these factors of doing things without permit, very quickly, very do-it-yourself, with all these details. For example, the detail that Schneider and Luescher did about the beams that were one on top of the other. Like we love all of that, like simple. We try to communicate and make our lives easier all the time. Be very fine and have very refined details, but very easily, no?
And in this part of our architecture, like it was very interesting how like you can see how the house is made, and it's for me is very significant that you can go there, and even that you don't know how to construct, or even that you are not an architect or what, or designer or whatever, you can go there and it's very simple. It's like stone over stone, like something like that, that you can see the beams, the steel beams and the wooden beams, putting one on top of the other one. And it's made of, like, it's not so easy, like when you are there constructing, it's not so easy like that, but it's easy to understand it. It's and these three projects are very in that
same line.
Mm-hmm.
It's like these are like three explorations. I'm gonna come back to this, and these are three explorations with just steel beams, like the hollow square 3x3 beams. We made a 3-story house with a 3x3 beam. It's very well calculated and it's very well thought, but friends would come to my house when I was building it, and it was like, is that calculated? Is that like in structurally, like is it gonna fall? So it's very playful. So then we started, those projects generated another wave of projects that was another scale in another place, in a certain place. These projects that we selected for this presentation are like groups of projects that we made. So the past one was the steel playful garden palafit, floating, very light projects. And these other projects are a little bit more heavy. We started to explore with other materials. We met a friend that introduced us to all this rammed earth and bajareque, which is an ancient technique here in America, and the cob technique that was originated. It was probably the first real technique after stones putting on top of each other. So we're just exploring with our sense of space, with our sense of structure, exploring these new ways of doing things that are beautiful, that you rammed earth and like all these lime finishes with colors that just decay and let the earth breathe, the floor breathe, the wall breathe, everything breathes. And it's very interesting. So we had the opportunity to do this house, which is like a triangular lot, and we did a house between two gardens. Like the point part of the lot had a garden, and in between the shifting two houses, the two wings of the house, there's another garden that emerges. So it's very fresh. We want to put all the light that we can into these places. Light is is definitely something very important for us, no? So sometimes there is too much light, sometimes there's always too much light, no? We try and get too much light.
Yeah.
Um,
And this house was made for our friend's mom. That guy, his name is Rodrigo Roy, and he makes this natural finishing and natural como
natural finishes, natural, like the, I forgot to mention his name, but yes, the one who got us into all of these mischievous activities was Rodrigo, and he wanted to make a palette of a palette house palette of different materials and different techniques. So we were like, yeah, why not?
That's why the walls are made of rammed earth, and we use them.
Oh, shit. I'm not gonna do that. I'm sorry.
We use them as a facade, but it's the principal walls of the house. It's almost all the walls in the house. So as you can see this type of construction, that it's natural construction with clay and earth and everything everywhere, like you can see everywhere. But it's a very modern house, because the thing it was like, we want to use that techniques but without being super hippies, you know, like making spirals and everything. And we we found these shapes and these
ways to do it. There's like it's just merging our aesthetic. It was like the yeah, merging. So then we also, in this group of houses, we did another group of houses in another lot very close by to this one, that is this round house. So we like very purist, we love circles and we love squares and we love all of those things. And we kind of feel that we just have to like give it a little twist to make it interesting. So the problem with the reason why this is a round house and these are like individual places was because as you can see in this picture, the two constructions here to the left in black and white pictures, you can see that there's nothing all around. So I was always taught to find a corner. You want to find a corner. You want to go and find a corner, a crevice where you build upon. But when there's no corner, you have to set, like, rise from nothing. And that's why we chose all these round buildings to be located right next to each other and merge into the landscape with the volcanoes and be similar to the volcanoes and play with them. And so, so this is a roundhouse for our client.
But first, this project, these three elements are the same project, and the project was a permacultural center, and it was in a big land, 1 hectare.
1 hectare, yeah, 10,000 feet, 10,000 square meters.
And they wanted to start this new project of a permacultural project, and they needed a house.
For the owner,
A house for the owner, Caliway, the Caliway
like
is
a multi-purpose space
and ceremonial center,
which is this. There we put like a very nice fire pit in those lime polished. That's natural lighting, you know, like it's like the light that these materials give is amazing.
And the one in the top is a model of bathrooms, tri bathrooms,
Ecological bathrooms,
ecological bathrooms.
not connected to any sewage system. Just, you know, like a box, you take it out and you put it in the compost.
So they ask for these three elements to start this new project.
It's like the seeding.
At the same time, there was a hydrological plan for the land because you can see that it's super dry and we cannot accumulate
Enough water
for all the land. So there was a hydrological plan for at the same time. It was architecture and the hydrological plan for this land. So
that consisted in like a very well thought. We incorporated in the architecture because the foundations of all these three elements have huge cisterns that accumulate with the roofs, the cute roofs that you can see, like they all get all the water and harness it, and they just get like huge amounts of water, but it's not enough for all the year. So aside from that, they made key line incisions in the earth to let all the water permeate, and in 10 years time, all that water that permeated began to make like a bank of water inside the land, so that the trees that will be planted there will no longer need that, like the things that are rooted very deeply into the land will not need any exterior irrigation, but from all this other planning. So these are like different stages of planning in a long term, in a medium term, so that's what permaculture is, no? We were learning all of these things as we went and doing this. So this was a point in our career that we were learning so much and so many things, interesting new things about the finishes, lime, earth, arcilla, clay. So yeah, this was a point of like explosion, these three projects. So then we have another set of projects that are imaginary projects. These are, we have, this was made during COVID, and this is like a tropical house layout that we just felt like we wanted to play around, and we just did this. We had no client. We just had, we were our clients, our eyes, our feelings, how we wanted to visualize these things. And we went ahead and did some anime inspired renders that we were watching some anime. We were watching all these Japanese and we got inspired, and we did, okay, we hate renders. We absolutely detest renders, but we're gonna try and give it a shot. And we gave this a shot. It was this Japanese aesthetic for the tropical house. Then this is like another set of projects that we have. There's this place in Mexico called Puerto Escondido that is very much a playground. I don't want to call it that, but I think that's what it is for architects now around this area of the world. And it's like, just like there's a lot of commercial development. There's a lot of artist development. There's a lot of artist residencies. So there's a lot of, and there's a highway that's being built to get there faster. So it's a place of it's like a melting pot of new architecture. And we have all these projects that is just like a visualization of the things that are coming for us in this near future, which is that we're wanting to use a lot of concrete in the beach in Mexico. No, I want to phrase this well because it's very important. Like the sustainable exercise and all this dogma and all of this thing of being sustainable and all of this is something that we really want to take care of and take into account, because we feel that sustainability doesn't have anything to do with the material. It has to do, but not in the level that everybody's selling it. Sustainability in these places that are well underdeveloped and very virgin, and there's not construction, there's no lines of electricity, and there's no sewage systems, and there's no water service, etc. People gotta be people have to be very conscious of what it is that they need there. So we felt that we went around and we saw that everything was made in concrete, and that it was everybody knows how to do the concrete. There's a store of concrete here, there's a store of bricks there. So all this mason work comes in very handy. So if you plan it very well, you can use the concrete and be very sustainable and just orient it to the places, make it very open, make wooden finishes, and you can be very intelligent with non-sustainable materials. So that's a message. We don't be afraid to like it's good to think outside the box, even though it looks like people are thinking inside the box. It's not. It's like a questioning of, oh, what's outside the box? Oh, this is outside the box. So maybe I need to like fusion it to make it work, all of it together, no? So this is another project of the drawing projects. And this is our latest project that was built, and it's our own house, no? It's our own house here in the city. This is a city house. And we love this place. It's our sanctuary. We have our office here, not for long anymore, because we different than as was explained before. Lubisch and Schneider's practice has lots of people employed and working, and here it's only Mariana and me. And we have an occasional intern that comes and refreshes our minds, because that's what we need. We just work from home, and we just sit in a table and make all these projects and draw them together, and we get inspired. And so having a house is very good because it's a showroom. And it's very important to have to be able to immerse people into watching images and models is very beautiful, especially models. But being able to bring somebody here and you learn how they move and how they perceive the space and how they do and how they feel is like a master class of what to do. So it's very, like, if anybody has the opportunity to do this, do it. Because in the first project we were lucky enough to make our own. We spent just to put it out there, in 2015, the first project, it was ¿cuántos 500,000 pesos? $25,000 for the first project it took us to build. 25,000?
Sí.
$25,000. So for us, it was like, it's the price of a car. Like you can do things for the price of a car. And that gave us so much strength and so much confidence and so much So it was very nice to be able to do things with nothing. And then as we get older, as we come along, we start to think and make more money and be able to put more money in and see how that effect has. So that's why we called our presentation Steady and Gentle, because architecture has to be steady and gentle. It has to go and it has to absorb time, and it has to be carefully made, and it has to be felt, and there has to be love, and there has to be observation, and there has to be so many things that make a house fully. I always say there's 3 different types of architecture. The one that's been drawn and not built, the one that's being built for an economic reasons, and people are trying to make a living, and there's all these economic purposes and money flow, etc., which is a great business. And there's the third type of architecture, that is this architecture done with time and with love and with a sense of existence and a sense of what's the word? It's a word of a sense of enlightenment, a sense of coming up together, and like sanctuary, like a temple. There's this very important part, and we love to round around the 3 and get the best of the 3 worlds, but we love to do the third one. The third one is what we love to do. So yeah. Oh, this is a last project. I thought that was the last one.
No.
So this is another project in Puerto Escondido, which belonged with the other ones, with the drawn economic, but still beautiful and still smart and still done with a great conscience. This is another project. So that's it for our slides.
Awesome. Well, I would just like to start by thanking both firms for the presentations today. Then I'll be moderating the discussion now after. So I'd like to start by saying I noticed that both the firms hit on this idea of meshing different styles and combining different architectural methods. And I was curious how you guys go about designing in this way, and what are some of the most important notions you keep in mind when doing that design process?
We were talking about this last week, that for us is very important. Like, as you can see in our work, we were evolving. At first we were super, like, we were kind of engaged with one technique because it was the thing that we knew, but by the time going, we felt more confident to doing bigger things, but more perdurables.
Yeah, like less ephemeral, if like, because it is like very ephemeral what we do. Like it's solid, or what we used to do, no? Like you can just like build, like unbuild it.
Yeah, so I think that it's very important to feel the confidence to make something that feels you, that to feels you, but going one step further from the step you are now, no? For me, I think that that's very important.
Yeah.
And be coherent between the, like, your intellectual and aesthetical needs, but the needs of the clients. And sometimes the client can be yourself. So that's very important.
It's very nice, right? That you right now that you touched, I would just want to make a side note that it's very nice and it's very educational to be like to put yourself in the client, to build stuff for your own good and for your own with your own money and with your own ideas, because you can really engage afterwards with your clients in a way better way, in a much better way. So yeah, it's just that.
I think this is interesting, and maybe I'll relate it a little bit to kind of what you're saying, Juan and Mariana. But I think for us, like Andre and I, we always approach every project like with a brand new kind of a blank slate, right? But it's not, it's easy to say, but it's not real, right? It's not a blank slate because we already have a history both designing together, but also all the history of everything I've already seen from my childhood to pretty much till today, like everything in a way has influenced me and Andre the same. We do base our practice heavily on architectural history. Like it's more of a hobby than I'm not a historian by any means, but I do like to contextualize everything we do in more of a lineage as opposed to like a ladder that's always going forward. It's okay if sometimes the ladder can go down, right? Like, are we contributing or are we taking away from the general lineage of a certain type of work? But with that being said, I think we really try to approach every project with a fresh kind of look at it. I think it's interesting to me that how these two firms, because they're both relatively at the same age of firms, but the way you guys approach it versus the way we approach it, where like all of our projects essentially have a client, right? So there's already parameters involved with the clients. There's obviously their perceived notion why they even came to us. A firm that's not established, that doesn't have really a particular style, nor are we interested in having a style. We've never wanted to have a style. But so it's based on parameters, right? It's the client as a parameter, the budget as a parameter, the city as a parameter. And then I look at your work and then it makes me very curious, right? Like this is very different from how we operate. In a way, I wish I had those freedoms to be able to be like, yeah, I'm my own client, do whatever I want, right? Or like I have this lot, I'm just gonna build it. But at the same time, I think Andre and I have always kind of pride ourselves in the fact that when we show up to a client meeting, and believe me, this is backfired. Sometimes they ask us like, well, what do you imagine could happen here? And I look at them dead in the eyes and I say like, I have zero idea, like zero, nothing. Like I'm blank right now. And I don't say this as a joke. I really do mean it, because to me, it's just like something will come, right? And we really rely on our process of creating buildings, right? Whether it's through sketches, drawings, models, whatever it is, our own mental process, like something will happen, right? But we need to get into the conversation with the client, because the way we perceive it is, in a way, we're tailors, right? We make tailor-made suits for clients. Like this is not developer architecture. This is not perspective architecture with a mythical client. It's a very real person that we're building for. And architecture as a profession requires means, right? Any type of construction, like for you to tell me 25K to build a house, I wish 25K in Los Angeles buys you the door, maybe, right? It's like, it's crazy. But I wish, right? It'd be amazing. But I think in a way, those restrictions, it's what kind of where we like to live. It's those restrictions that I think makes us more like proficient in trying to come up with something, right? But it's interesting to see these two methodologies.
Absolutely. Thank you both for those answers. I think that's very insightful. And if anyone wants to ask anything, also feel free to unmute and speak up, or use the hand raise reaction. There was one question in the chat that was talking about working with hybrid typologies within additions and renovations, and how that influences how you guys take on projects that are designed from the ground up.
Yeah, so we have a couple of projects that are obviously from the ground up. I think it's not necessarily a different thing. Like, it's not like we all of a sudden have to change the way I think. I think it's very much like along the lines of how we design anything. Like Andre and I, when we're Johnson Mark Lee, like we're both kind of spearheading the design, the Manil Drawing Institute. But at the same time, I had to do the central utility plan, right? And this is like a box, right? It's 100 by 100 foot box. I have zero ideas how central utility plan works, like literally zero experience, zero ideas. And it was just kind of thrown at me. It's like, figure it out, right? And I think that's the way we really work. Sometimes we have to become instant experts at something because we just got a weird project. It's like, what the hell? How do you do this? Like, really, there isn't a project that we would shy away from. So in terms of like the idea of like the hybrid as a way of working, really to that was really for us more a result of framing the lecture, right? Understanding how do you talk about projects of additions without just simply talking about like, well, here we did a bedroom addition and it has a spiral staircase, and here it's like a addition with the skylight. I think as architects, you really have to put your body of work in kind of like a chamber where you could actually understand how they're talking to each other, right? Because the commonality of all the projects is Andre and I, right, or our team. That really is what the lineage of the architecture is. I don't know if that made sense.
No, I think so. And then for me, I'm pretty personally interested in, so you're talking about kind of these two different styles working together and talking to each other. And I was curious how do you find, or how do you evaluate how successful that is within different contexts? Because if you have different, styles that you're working with from time to time, like how do you evaluate what the success of that is?
I don't know if we actually rank like whether they succeeded or not. Like, I mean, it's always strange. Like, for example, right now we're working on a project in Paris, right? An interior project. It's all interior based. It's in the island. It's a very traditional project, but obviously we want to have our take on it. Like, how do you contemporize something that's traditional? And by this, I mean like the moldings, for example. Parisian moldings, very heavy, right? So instead of saying like, well, I don't know anything about moldings, I don't want to prescribe to the 5 orders of architecture, or whatever it is, right? It's like, so instead it's just like, we essentially found we found an architect of record in Paris, but we've been developing a relationship with builders. And by that, I mean like actual talleres, right? Like workshops. And in Paris, they're very prominent. Like, so the stone makers are still very much there. Like, you can talk to a expert stonemaker, right? An expert carver. And it got to the point where it's like, hey, I want to work with the people that are renovating Versailles, right? Like, if we're going to do traditional moldings, then I want to have the top dog as a consultant to show me what the capabilities are, right? So when you design it, we have a molding placeholder in hand, but I haven't designed the filigree of what it is. I think that's almost allowing room for the craftsman to take over the project. And for me, it's an interesting conversation. Like, what do you control and what do you let be? And in architecture, it's very hard. Most architects are like control freaks, right? It's like, I want to make sure everything is the way I want it in my vision. I think as we grow older, I think we more and more, not so much delegate, but start trusting other systems, other people's skills. And I think that always generates a better building in my eyes.
I would like to add a little bit upon that, because you're so right. With the control, like in our experience, we had smaller projects before, and we would always try and control all the time everything. And as you would grow older, you would like start to know that generates conflict, and that is not like it's just like, instead of you like being able to carry on through the mainstream, you just get clotted up inside with all the people, because you think that you know best, but it's their own special specialties. It's their specialty, and you have to trust that, and you have to become mature, and you have to understand that you have to let go, and also trust that, because you are designing. And if you pay enough attention to your design, you can control from before how logical it will be at the end, at the moment of construction, and at the moment of living in it, and at the moment of cleaning it, etc. So that como clinginess that architects usually have, and that we've made like a huge effort to leave behind, and to be like, oh, you wanted yellow, let's do yellow. But you can also see and try, like, there's ways to do it, but you have to let go and plan it from before, like educate yourself to do it before and let go in the moment where there's people, let everybody do their job. Like it's very important.
Absolutely. Thank you both for those answers. Matt, do you have a question you want to ask?
Hi guys. Yeah, I had a question for directed towards Talleresque. So I was curious like how, because you guys have this like kind of a lack of like, at least with the earlier projects, or like a lack of like formality. But I was like kind of curious like what kind of like freedoms does that grant, or like maybe like what are some of the constraints that you kind of found yourselves in those kinds of situations? Like designing with that lack of formality.
I feel that the lack of like whenever you're giving a freedom, whenever like it's easier to have more constraints. We know that, no? It's easier. Like like if you're giving a blank canvas and you're like, you have all the materials in the world and the size of the canvas is the size, like what the hell are we gonna do? But the way we start is like, you just have to like, we have our materials, we have our education, we have the things that we saw in the childhood, we have all these memories, and they start to focus in. It's like the job of the architect also is to channel all these things, and how well you channel all these things is part of the big percentage of the architect's work is like talking with the client, being able to channel these spiritual things that come and go as they please, and you have to just catch them. And the materials is also a boundary. So the lack of formality, in my opinion, we do have like a very strong form. Like you can tell when there is when you can tell that something is esque, like talleresque, like that's why we like to the esque. We come back to that. So I think that the formality just comes from looking at the places and the materials you have in mind, and kind of like the vibe you feel. It's very much of the feelings. We've stopped coming to work thinking of wanting to do something like something. We just like kind of like get thrown, like it's just comes. You have to people, we all have to get educated to have that automatic thing that goes on, and you just like do it. It's like eating, like it's non-logical. It's strange to say, but it's like that.
No, yeah, that makes sense. Like you're improvising, but even within that, there's a certain logic behind it.
Yeah, in music, when because we love music and we love to play music, our teachers like taught us that improvisation was the use of your resources, the well use of your resources. It's like, what do you have? What can you find? Like, if you don't have a crane to bring here to film this like great flying camera, let's think of other things, or like maybe it just doesn't have to fly. Maybe it just has to be still. So it's just a matter of logic. It's training. It's training. It's training your brain, training your spirit.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Thank you guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, there's another question in the chat directed for Schneider. It was, what was the first project that you had designed that you decided it is time to think outside the box and just let the design go?
I'm not sure I understand that question. I like boxes, so I don't know. I always think in the box. No, I'm not gonna. But even in school, it's like, to me, there's this kind of like we talk a lot about like formalism in terms of the volumes and what it is, right? Like in a way, the ratio of details, right? If we see a lot of our work and even Johnson Markley's work, it's like we're hiding details. More and more we're showing like tectonics, but it's a different kind of tectonic. It's not like the, you know, steel assembly like the Renzo Pianos or Norman Foster's. It's not that kind of, we're not building those kinds of buildings, at least in Southern California. So I think the idea to think outside the box, to me, I actually think if you talk about kind of proficiency in architecture, a lot of times the reason buildings are boxes is because that's the easiest way to build them, right? So I know I'm catching around the question, but in a way, I don't feel, we don't never fear having, we never had a problem having boring buildings. Andre and I are like, we're fan of boring buildings that are one-liners, buildings that are dumb. Like to me, those are all great attitudes of buildings. Like I teach this to my students. Like it's not that it should have one-liner, but it's always the idea of like the delayed reaction, right? You want something to look kind of dumb on surface level, but then when you start reading into it and understanding it deeper, there's more to it, right? There's more layers that are hidden in there. So it's a little bit to do with the subversive. And we have a lot of Easter eggs both in our office, that what we think, like a lot of times it's what I don't say, it's actually what I mean. But going a little bit back to Juan's point about this idea of intuition, I think this is something, and it sounds very backwards, but I try to tell this to my students and to the people that work here, and even to myself, right? Like in a way, architecture school is indoctrination of how to think about architecture, right? And we've all been taught, mainly relatively the same age, at least that people are presenting here. So we've all been taught by ex-modernists, right? Or like descendants of modernism. And yes, while there have been movements, postmodernism, constructivism, deconstructivism, there's a bunch of movements that happen from modernism. Primarily, the methodology of schooling has still has roots in modernism, which to me has to do with rationalism, right? Now, what Juan and I maybe are talking about is the irrational thoughts, right? The thoughts about emotion and the thoughts about like the gut feeling, right? So what I always try to tell my students, like, it's not about thinking outside the box, thinking inside the box. It's really about following your gut, right? Understanding that it's like, hey, this feels right to me. Like, why did you do that? Because it looks good. Like, it's a dumb explanation, right? But it's not over intellectualized. It's actually, it just feels good. It looks good, right? And that's really how we're trying to work, that in general, like that we always have to learn to trust your gut. Now, that doesn't say dismiss architecture school. I think you need to understand this formalism, this rationalism, to then be able to start erasing that kind of train of thought as you progress in your career.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's kind of an important notion that we don't necessarily talk about all the time. So yeah, it's definitely something interesting to think about. Frank, I saw you made a comment on one of the reviews. I didn't know if you wanted to add anything in at all, or.
Oh, yeah, I just want to say thanks, guys, for the presentations. I mean, it's really fantastic to see the work, and also in this kind of comparative way, you know, which I think you know, Pablo and Laura are probably doing intentionally, and how you've set up your practices with, you know, very, very different ways, you know, very different approaches. Anton and Andres, this idea of a kind of you know, ongoing dialogue, which I think between existing buildings and this kind of transformation, which I think gives the work a real vitality, and Talleresque work, you know, in a really powerful, you know, relationship to landscapes, through the own construction, this almost do-it-yourself approach to tectonics, materials, and thinking about geometry as a kind of driver for form in relationship to these incredible landscapes with the volcanoes is amazing. I think what was interesting about your practice, I think with the last two projects, was a kind of a few clues, I think, about how your practice may continue to evolve in terms of starting to look at larger scale projects, or a kind of very introverted urban project where you're, I guess, where you're sitting right now, where you live, this kind of thing. So I was just, maybe, so that kind of ping pongs the question back to Anton and Andre, you know, as you guys, you know, start to maneuver in sites that are more urban, or say larger scale, or ground up. I think somebody was talking about that. what do you think will happen, or what are the tools or strategies, or maybe more vaguely ambitions about how you might imagine your project, your practice evolving, say in the next 5 or 10 years? Would be curious, because it seems like the power now is really about these very intense dialogues between existing buildings and how they're transformed into what you call these hybrids, or these kind of monsters, which are fascinating. So I'd be curious, like, what's next? What's on the agenda?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think just thinking about these hybrid monsters, I think for us it's really just because we've gotten so many of these kind of additions thrown at us that we kind of have to figure out a way to work with these. A lot of these houses are really messed up. It's like, how do you add to them, right? But I think for us, we always like to have buildings. It's like you can't tell where our hand was. And to me, it's almost like a level of success for that type of project, where it's like, I can't tell the old from the new. And obviously, this is a very specific type of way of working. There's other firms that very much like to say, like, hey, that's the existing, this is the new. I think this is really more for these particular projects. We have been doing ground up construction, both in our firm and previously in the past. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's a different methodology. It's still kind of the same train of thought in terms of how do you develop projects. But I think we're very aware that not everything's scalable. Like especially formalistic ideas, like you can't scale them. Like it doesn't work that way. So I think we've always been interested in systems more than the approach, right? So developing a system of train of thought or a way to develop a particular building. Like when we had to do like the Dropbox headquarters, it was like almost 750,000 square feet of office space, which is like an unheard of square footage account. Like we essentially took every project that we had ever worked on in our lifetimes and dropped them in a plan to see how much square footage we've actually built. And I think we came out to about 350,000 square feet, both all my projects and Johnson Mark-Lee's projects. So in a way, it kind of required a new approach of how to think of something that's much, much larger. So while I can't tell you for definite what the new methodology is, like for sure, I think I trust on the procedural aspect of how we approach buildings, that somehow we will be able to absorb whatever gets thrown at us.
Awesome, thank you. Sadie, if you have a question, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Cole. I have a question for Talleresque. You guys talk about having your structural language be really comprehensible and allowing your materials to breathe. And I think that's beautiful. Does that change the way people interact with your buildings because they're exposed and kind of understandable?
Yes, completely. The choice of the materials and all of that is like it makes me think of being cozy. Like for example, the house, the project. I think that the perfect example for this that you're mentioning is that I was able to live in this house that we built together, and we were able to live when there were no windows, when there was no anything. There was like this latrine bathroom for like the workers because it was all like under construction, and we had to live here and we had to do all these things. And the materials helped. The materials were very good to us, and they made it seem cozy, and the wood made it look like it was warmer. It wasn't like this concrete smell of like, although there's a lot of concrete, but the places, like the more intimate places in the house, have lots of wood. So that's just like straight up like that it is very important for us, and we do want to give that vibe of like coziness all the time, and very raw coziness.
Laura, did you have something you want to say?
Yes.
Yeah, I did. Thank you guys, both of you, Talleresque and Schneider Luescher, so much for your presentations. And I guess we did not actually pick the two of you together. You picked each other just by chance. And I think that it's makes for a wonderful pairing, somehow out of pure coincidence. But I think that even though your work in some way is extremely distinct one from the other, I find there to be some super strong affinities. I mean, the context is completely different, but in a way, your projects across the board are something that could be made from a hardware store, you know. The hardware store may be different in Southern California than in Mexico City, but nonetheless, there's this kind of honesty towards the materials that are available and at hand. I think both of your practices are devoted to finding a way of working with those materials that are there around you, to bring out what is the most interesting thing that you can of them. I mean, even the kind of drywall, like 2x4 American framing, drywall construction has this kind of tectonic logic and honesty that, you know, it comes from Home Depot, but it's still in a way it's like it's your that I see it as your kind of research, like how do you make American construction interesting, and similarly, you know, for the work that Talleresque does in Mexico City, it's what you have at hand are these like super straightforward and honest kind of concrete, reinforced concrete structures, and brick and wood and even rammed earth, and you're trying to just develop ways in which that becomes more expressive of its natural or like logic, simple tectonic. So I think, you know, yeah, like the expression of the project is super different, but in a way, I think that you're trying to tackle the same question. And that to me is like so exciting and such a lesson for our students as well, you know, that you have to literally like go find out what's around you, what you can build with directly at hand, and how does that become a project that involves or develops a kind of tectonic honesty. I think that's pretty cool. Sorry, that's not a question.
No, I think I heard a question in there, Laura. I think it's interesting what you're proposing with like, so it's not quite regionalism, right? But the idea of like Andre and I always kind of joke about this, right? I'm Mexican, he's from Switzerland, and we always say like is our firm like Mexican precision and Swiss heart, or is it the other way around, like the typical way you would think, right? Swiss precision, Mexican heart. But for me, it's really more about like understanding whatever systems are available like, in your area, right? Like the idea of us saying like this is a thought I've always had in Mexico City, right? I grew up there. It's like, why is the construction always type 1 construction, which is heavy concrete bearing columns infilled with brick? It's to me, I have a feeling it comes from a colonial aspect of colonial architecture and a methodology that was introduced to a region that was not really building out of concrete or brick. Like if you look at the back in the times, like it's mainly made out of wood construction, right? It makes sense. It's a seismic area, and at the time there were a lot of trees in the area. Right now, systems change and technology evolves, but I can't help but to think are we building methodologies that were prescribed by European or Westernized nations, right? When they came over to the Americas to essentially implement these things, because you see it, right? In Switzerland, they build a lot out of concrete. It makes sense. They're using heavy walls, but for insulation purposes. but it's also a way to bring in light to a space. So I think for us as a firm, as a maybe to think bigger, we do work with hybrid systems. I don't think there's anything as something that's like, oh, you have to be pure to any type of form, aesthetic, or material. I think it's really like use everything at your disposal, right? I think that's why we wanted to show the construction shots of the buildings, right? It's like to show it's like there's no such thing as an all steel house or all wood construction. It's always a hybrid building. So I think we look at materials that way too. Like there's nothing that's so pure or is based off of a principle. It's really more how does it feel and what works, right?
Yeah, and actually, to continue on these two thoughts, I think that we have each of our studios a different take on pragmatism. Pragmatism is a word that I like to use. And we were talking about it earlier about having to and wanting to make our work easier and everything easier, but to make it the most like use the less is more, but without that aesthetic that is connected to, no? We use the words, we use the all this thing. So you guys are pragmatic at one point. You were and I'm very interested in that because we like the different, like it being different. Like you were saying that you love boxes, and we learn a lot from boxes. We try never to do. It's not that we try never to do, but we like very open things, and it ceases to be a box when it's very open. So it's like something of a condition that we have in our work and in our DNA and in our, like, it's like, no, open it as much as you can. But we're always thinking about pragmatism. It's just a different take on the same concept.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for your time and presentations once again. It was a discussion, a lot of inspiration and really thoughts. And unless anyone has any final comments or questions, want to be time sensitive and let you guys go. But once again, thank you both so much for sharing. And I look forward to seeing what you guys come up with in the future.
Well, thanks so much
Thank
for the
you.
invitation. It's always nice to be invited by Pablo and Laura. We love what they do. So yeah, anytime.
Yes,
you.
thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much as well. We really enjoyed it, and it's so cool to make new friends.
Y cuando están en Los Ángeles, ya saben, Mariana y Juan, nos visitan.
Sí.
Muchas gracias.
Sí te vamos a tomar la palabra, ¿eh?
Sí,
Igual cuando vengas acá, para que vengas a conocer la casa. Come, everybody's free to come and have a coffee or beer, mezcal over at our place. Whenever you come, just let us know.
We'll take that invitation as well. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Bye.
Pablo, Laura, muchas gracias.
Talk soon, and thanks everyone else for joining and for your participation. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.